Kanan is a beautiful and mischievous demon who hides as a perfect student, secretly viewing humans as food. But everything changes when she meets Yuji, a boy who doesn't fear her at all. Instead, he treats her with warmth and sincerity. The story starts at Tama Academy, where there is a strange rumor quietly circulating among the students, one that speaks about a breathtakingly beautiful girl who is often seen watching over the school from the disciplinary committee's window, carrying herself with such elegance and authority that no one would ever suspect that behind that flawless appearance, she is actually not human at all, but a demon named Kanan. Now, one day, something very unusual begins to unfold, as a boy named Yuji suddenly finds himself walking through the school in a strange, trance-like state, and despite not knowing where he is going, his body continues forward as though it is being guided by an invisible force that he cannot resist. Eventually, he reaches the disciplinary committee room, and the moment he crosses the threshold, something instantly changes, as if a switch has been flipped, causing his awareness to return all at once, making him blink in confusion while looking around the room, completely unsure of why he is there or what just happened to him. That is when he notices Kanan, who stands calmly before him as if she has been expecting his arrival all along, and without hesitation or any attempt to soften her words, she plainly informs him that she was the one who summoned his soul, and that her intention is to devour it. Now, under normal circumstances, anyone would react with fear, panic, or even try to escape upon hearing something like that, but Yuji, instead of showing any sign of terror, simply looks at her with confusion, as if he cannot fully grasp the seriousness of what she just said, which immediately disrupts Kanan's expectations. Seeing that her words alone are not enough to convey the situation, Kanan transforms into her demon form, revealing a more intimidating presence as she proudly introduces herself as a gourmet demon, and then proceeds to explain her background in a calm yet confident manner, as though she is describing something completely ordinary. She explains that in the demon realm, she lived a life surrounded by luxury, where extravagant meals were prepared for her every single day, each dish crafted with precision and presented beautifully. Yet despite the effort and perfection behind those meals, none of them ever brought her any satisfaction, leaving her feeling empty no matter how much she consumed. Because of that growing dissatisfaction, she eventually sought out her father, Beelzebub, and admitted to him that ordinary food no longer fulfilled her desires, expressing instead her curiosity about something far more unusual: human souls, particularly those of young humans, which she intended to carefully nurture before consuming at their peak. Rather than rejecting her idea, her father considered it seriously and ultimately decided that such an experience could contribute to her growth, although before allowing her to leave, he casually asked whether she had ever shared a meal with anyone before, a question that Kanan answered with confidence by saying no, which seemed to satisfy him enough to simply wish her luck before returning his attention to his meal. After that, Kanan entered the human world and took on the form of a beautiful high school girl, quickly adapting to her new environment with ease as she excelled academically, behaved perfectly, and maintained an elegant image, which allowed her to gain the trust and admiration of those around her, eventually earning a position on the disciplinary committee where she could observe students closely. From the rooftop, she would often look down at the students, and rather than seeing them as classmates or individuals, she viewed them as potential meals, treating the school itself as her personal pasture where she could carefully raise the food she intended to consume in the future. However, as time passed, her hunger gradually intensified until one morning it became impossible for her to ignore any longer, prompting her to finally decide that it was time to act and feast on at least one soul, leading her to scan the crowd of students below until she found one that stood out among the rest. That soul belonged to Yuji. Without hesitation, she placed him under a trance and summoned him to the disciplinary committee room, bringing the story back to the present moment where he now stands before her, confused and unaware of what is truly happening. As Kanan begins describing how she plans to prepare him before devouring his soul, Yuji completely misinterprets her words, assuming that she is speaking in a flirtatious manner rather than a literal one, and to her complete surprise, he suddenly kneels down and bows deeply, thanking her for paying attention to him. Kanan is left utterly confused as Yuji explains that it has always been his dream to be noticed by someone as beautiful as her, even going as far as to say that her demon-like appearance makes the situation even more appealing, which causes Kanan to realize that he has entirely misunderstood her intentions. As the situation grows more awkward, Kanan attempts to maintain control while internally panicking, especially when she begins to realize that she has no experience with human relationships or emotions, leading her to insist that people should only share intimacy with someone they truly love. However, Yuji immediately responds by saying that he already likes her, a statement that catches Kanan completely off guard and forces her to pause, as she begins to question what it truly means to like someone, something she has never considered before. While observing him more carefully, she suddenly notices that he is actually quite handsome, which only adds to her confusion as Yuji continues expressing his feelings openly, causing her to struggle even more to maintain her composure as she reminds herself that she is supposed to be a powerful demon in control of the situation. At some point, Yuji senses that he may have overwhelmed her, so he quietly backs off and adjusts himself properly, an action that Kanan notices and unexpectedly interprets as thoughtful, even though she cannot fully understand why. Then, in an attempt to ease the tension, Yuji suggests that they start by dating instead, a simple proposal that surprisingly calms Kanan down almost instantly, leading her to agree after a brief moment of hesitation. Yuji reacts with overwhelming excitement, quickly fixing his uniform before rushing out of the room, leaving Kanan alone as she begins to question whether she may have been tricked into something she does not fully understand. Later that day, Yuji casually tells his childhood friend that he now has a girlfriend, shocking her at first before she becomes happy for him and even suggests the idea of using nicknames, which plants a small idea in his mind. Meanwhile, Kanan continues observing the students as usual, but is suddenly startled when Yuji unexpectedly appears by jumping through the window, insisting that she call him by his first name now that they are dating. Although she initially feels nervous, she attempts to assert dominance by teasing him, only for his enthusiastic reaction to completely disarm her, making her realize that he is actually quite cute in his own way. When she tries to say his name, she struggles to even get the first syllable out, no matter how many times she repeats it in her head, and when Yuji points out her embarrassment, she quickly deflects by demanding that he say her name first. When he does so without hesitation, she experiences a strange and unfamiliar feeling, one that briefly excites her before she regains her composure, although Yuji continues to press her by leaning closer and encouraging her to say his name, which only makes her panic even more. In the end, she pushes him away and leaves, but not before finally managing to say his name, which fills Yuji with joy. As she walks away, her emotions feel mixed and confusing, and although she tries to reaffirm her goal of devouring human souls, Yuji's presence continues to disrupt her thoughts. Later on, as Kanan continues observing the school like usual, she suddenly notices two students openly flirting with each other, and without hesitation, she steps in to scold them, her strict tone immediately breaking the mood and causing the two students to panic the moment they recognize her, quickly running off in opposite directions. As the hallway returns to normal, Kanan reflects on what she just saw, thinking that humans are far too easily controlled by their desires, and as she watches the other students pass by, she quietly vows to keep their souls pure and untainted, so that she can devour them at their best someday. But just as she is lost in those thoughts, Yuji suddenly appears right behind her and casually mentions that he hopes they can be like those couples one day, which instantly sends Kanan into a panic. Trying to regain control, she quickly steps away and asks him seriously what he actually wants from her. But Yuji only looks confused, since to him, it is completely normal for couples to want to spend time together, and without overthinking it, he casually asks where she would like their first time to be. The moment he says that, Kanan stiffens as her mind begins racing, panicking at the fact that he is already thinking about locations, which frustrates her because she believes such things should only happen much later, after something as serious as marriage. Even so, she forces herself to stay calm and ask which location he has in mind. Yuji honestly says the park, but that only makes Kanan more nervous, as she can't imagine doing something inappropriate in a public place, and even when he explains that he simply wants it to be memorable, she becomes overwhelmed and asks for another option. Then he suggests the movies, which only makes things worse, so he changes his approach and proposes going on a trip together, briefly exciting Kanan until he casually mentions hot springs, immediately making her think he is shameless. Flustered, she insists that something meaningful should happen in the privacy of a room, still misunderstanding everything, while Yuji calmly writes down her preference in his notes. As he expresses how touched he is that they are planning something meaningful together, Kanan becomes even more embarrassed, until suddenly, everything clicks. She realizes she completely misunderstood what he meant by first time, and the moment that realization hits her, she lets out a shocked scream. Desperate to recover, she quickly acts confident before immediately running away in embarrassment. Later, as school ends and students begin heading home, Kanan stands quietly trying to calm herself, but Yuji appears again and casually invites her to walk home together. Surprised, she questions it, but when he simply says he is her boyfriend, her heart unexpectedly flutters, and although she tries to stay composed, she ends up agreeing. However, as they walk, Kanan begins falling behind because her heart is racing so fast that she feels exhausted, and when Yuji notices, she makes an excuse that he should walk ahead and protect her. Instead, he pulls her closer and reassures her, which only makes her more flustered, and when he offers his hand, she freezes, overthinking the meaning of such a simple action. After panicking, she comes up with her own solution. Soon, people begin staring because Kanan has tied Yuji's hands with a rope and is holding the other end, confidently claiming that this is what holding hands means, before asking what he thinks. To her surprise, Yuji actually enjoys it, interpreting her actions as a sign that she does not want to let him go, which embarrasses her so much that she suddenly runs away. But as she heads toward the park to calm down, she hears his voice behind her, only to realize that she has been dragging him along the ground because she forgot she was still holding the rope. Even then, Yuji simply laughs it off and says it was exciting, even joking that being treated like a pet might be fun. Frustrated, Kanan turns away, but Yuji quickly suggests they do something simple together. At first, she misunderstands again, but instead, they end up sitting on a bench with croquettes. Yuji shares that he has always wanted to eat together with his girlfriend, and hearing that unexpectedly relaxes Kanan. As she reaches for sauce, Yuji stops her, insisting it is already perfect, and although she questions him, his passionate explanation makes her giggle, so she decides to humor him and eats it plain. The moment she takes a bite, she freezes, because for the first time in her life, something actually tastes good. As she processes that unfamiliar feeling, Yuji happily says it tastes better today, believing it is because they are eating together, and although Kanan does not fully understand, she continues eating quietly while he watches her with a smile and calls her cute, making her blush. And in that quiet moment, as the sun slowly sets, Kanan begins drifting away from her original purpose, because instead of seeing humans as prey, she is slowly starting to understand them. Meanwhile, far away in the underworld, Beelzebub, Kanan's father, continues eating as usual, but despite the endless food in front of him, his thoughts remain restless as he keeps wondering how Kanan is doing in the human world, and the more he worries, the more he eats as if trying to fill the uneasiness inside him, which does not go unnoticed by his maid Ammy, who begins to feel concerned after watching his unusual behavior for some time, and when he finally admits that he is worried about Kanan. Ammy immediately offers to go to the human world to check on her, and the moment she receives his permission, she quietly smiles to herself in a way that suggests she might have her own hidden intentions. Back in the human world, Kanan wakes up inside a house that she does not truly belong to, as she has used her powers to manipulate the minds of the family living there into believing that she is their daughter, and as she steps out of her room, her fake parents greet her warmly while her younger brother looks up to her with admiration, completely unaware that their memories have been altered, and although Kanan responds kindly and even shows what appears to be genuine affection, the truth is that she chose this family specifically because of their kindness, knowing that such traits make them easier to control and exploit, which perfectly fits her nature as a demon. However, just as she prepares to leave for school, something unusual begins to happen as the family suddenly feels that something is not quite right. Their expressions subtly shifting as if their minds are starting to question reality itself, forcing Kanan to immediately react by strengthening the hypnosis she placed on them, carefully reinforcing their perception until their doubts completely disappear, and once everything returns to normal, she calmly leaves the house feeling satisfied, even smiling slightly to herself as she feels refreshed after playing with humans again, especially since she believes she has been slacking off lately and not acting like a proper demon. As she walks through the streets, Kanan begins thinking about humans and what they really are, quietly muttering her thoughts to herself as she tries to come up with an answer. But before she can finish, she suddenly hears Yuji's voice calling out to her, which causes her to freeze in surprise as she turns and sees him standing right in front of her house, something she never expected, while Yuji, completely calm, simply explains that since he is her boyfriend, he thought it would be natural for them to walk to school together, a statement that takes her a moment to process before she quickly demands to know how he found her house, only for him to admit that he asked their homeroom teacher Yuro, who willingly gave him the information because she enjoys romance, which only adds to Kanan's frustration. Even so, after a brief moment of hesitation, she allows him to walk with her, but only on the condition that he can keep up, and without giving him any warning, she suddenly dashes forward, fully confident that her abilities as a demon will allow her to leave him behind easily. But as she continues running, she quickly begins to feel her energy fading as her weak stamina starts to betray her, forcing her to slow down as Yuji eventually catches up and casually asks if she is tired, a question she immediately denies even though it is obvious, which leads her to try and cover it up by claiming that a woman should always walk behind her man, hoping to sound dignified, only for Yuji to calmly point out that such a phrase applies to wives, not girlfriends, which leaves her even more embarrassed than before. Trying to recover, Kanan struggles to respond, but before the awkwardness can continue, Yuji hands her a bottle of water and tells her to drink while asking her to leave some for him, which causes her to overthink the situation as she wonders if he is trying to create an indirect kiss, making her glance back and forth between the bottle and his face, until she decides to take control by drinking the entire bottle in one go and throwing it away, leaving no chance for him to share it. However, just as she thinks things have settled, a new problem appears as Ammy arrives in the human world and quickly spots Kanan, immediately approaching her with excitement, while Kanan reacts with clear irritation and drags her straight to the disciplinary committee room to avoid attention, where she demands an explanation, but Ammy simply hugs her happily and explains that she came to serve her, which Kanan does not fully believe, especially given Ammy's personality. At that moment, Yuji suddenly enters the room, forcing Kanan to quickly explain that Ammy is her maid from childhood in order to avoid suspicion, while secretly thinking that Ammy must have tricked Beelzebub into letting her come here. And as Ammy continues acting affectionately, Kanan realizes that she is the worst possible demon for Yuji to interact with, since she openly encourages reckless behavior, making Kanan worry that Yuji might be influenced by her. This fear becomes real when Ammy notices Yuji's soul and realizes that it is extremely high quality, prompting her to suddenly pounce on him with the intention of devouring him, forcing Kanan to immediately pull her away and firmly declare that Yuji is off limits, which confuses Ammy until Kanan shyly admits that Yuji is her boyfriend, causing Ammy to become excited and start teasing her relentlessly, asking for details about their relationship, only to become disappointed when she learns that they have barely progressed beyond holding hands and eating together. Ammy criticizes Kanan for being too innocent and suggests that she should take things further if she wants to keep Yuji devoted. But Kanan rejects the idea and calls it indecent, even though she is a demon, which leads Ammy to jokingly warn her that if she moves too slowly, she might take Yuji for herself, a possibility that Yuji immediately rejects as he declares that Kanan is the only girl for him, a statement that Kanan pretends to be annoyed by but secretly feels happy about, something that Ammy quickly notices. Later, things become more chaotic as Kanan discovers several students collapse in the hallway with blissful expressions, leading her to the science lab where she catches Ammy feeding on students, causing her to become furious since those were souls she had carefully nurtured. And although Ammy casually explains that she only feeds on people she finds charming, which surprisingly includes their kindness, Kanan still warns her not to cause trouble within the school, and Ammy agrees. However, Kanan cannot stop thinking about Yuji and begins to worry that he might fall for Ammy, leading her to decide that she will keep him close at all times under the excuse of teaching him his place, even though her real reason is jealousy, which becomes obvious as Yuji unintentionally attracts attention from multiple girls throughout the day, with each interaction forcing Kanan to step in and separate them, while insisting that she is not jealous. Eventually, she confronts him directly and complains about how he keeps attracting attention, but Yuji calmly responds that his role is simply to be her boyfriend, which leaves her flustered and unable to argue. And later, when they walk home together, she keeps her distance at first before suddenly leaning against him and admitting that he belongs to her, her emotions finally showing as tears form in her eyes, while Yuji gently comforts her by patting her head, causing a warm feeling to spread through her body that she cannot resist, ultimately making her melt under his touch as she struggles to understand these unfamiliar emotions. And as all of this unfolds, Ammy watches from above with great interest, fascinated by the unusual relationship between a demon and a human, quietly observing as their bond continues to grow in ways that neither of them fully understands, suggesting that things will only become more complicated from here. A few days later, on a quiet day off from school, things turned unexpectedly tense. Kanan happened to see Yuji having lunch with his childhood friend. The moment she noticed them together, she felt uneasy and irritated. Not far away, Ammy quickly picked up on Kanan's mood. Instead of helping, she quietly laughed to herself, finding the situation amusing. Yuji, however, didn't notice anything wrong. When he saw Kanan, he greeted her cheerfully. Kanan didn't respond kindly. She immediately asked who the girl with him was. Yuji casually introduced her as Nadeko, but the girl corrected him, saying her name was Nadeshiko. That small detail made Kanan remember something. She had seen the name Nadeshiko in Yuji's messages before. Back then, he said Nadeshiko was his childhood friend. Seeing them together now made Kanan suspicious. She started to think Nadeshiko might be getting too close to him. As they talked, Nadeshiko complained that Yuji kept using her last name. She told him to call her something cuter and more familiar. This only made Kanan more irritated. It sounded too intimate to her. Trying to ease the tension, Nadeshiko apologized and explained that it was only because they had known each other for a long time. At that moment, Ammy joined them. She casually asked Nadeshiko if she had any special memories with Yuji. Kanan was surprised, but Ammy ignored her and focused on Nadeshiko. Nadeshiko happily shared stories. She talked about how they used to play together at a park and even had sleepovers as kids. Then she mentioned an embarrassing story, saying Yuji once wet the bed. Yuji quickly denied it, saying he only spilled juice, but Nadeshiko kept smiling and said he used to be cuter back then. Kanan quietly sat nearby, listening. The more she heard, the more irritated she became. Their shared past made her feel like she couldn't compete. Nadeshiko soon noticed the tension and asked Yuji why Kanan was acting that way. Yuji simply answered that Kanan was his girlfriend. Nadeshiko was shocked. Her face turned red as she quickly stood up and tried to explain. She said they weren't dating and that their closeness was just because their families were connected. But Kanan misunderstood and thought Nadeshiko was bragging. Nadeshiko became flustered and tried to explain more, but everything she said only made things worse. Each detail made their relationship sound even closer. Finally, Kanan told her to stop. For a moment, Nadeshiko felt relieved, but when she looked at Kanan again, she froze. Kanan was smiling, but it was a cold and dangerous smile. In a chilling voice, she threatened to kill her and throw her remains into the demon world. Nadeshiko panicked and begged Yuji to explain, but he was completely distracted by Kanan's smile. Desperate, Nadeshiko started praising Kanan, saying she and Yuji were a perfect couple. It didn't help. As Kanan stepped closer and described terrifying ways to torture her, Nadeshiko became even more afraid. In panic, she suddenly called Kanan Yuji's wife. That changed everything. Kanan immediately blushed, her threatening aura disappearing. She looked embarrassed but happy. Nadeshiko stared in confusion, unable to understand the sudden shift. Kanan then cheerfully said she liked Nadeshiko, but also called her a lowly creature, leaving Nadeshiko unsure how to react. Soon after, Kanan became lost in her own thoughts, happy about being called a wife. Later, at Kanan's home, things calmed down. Ammy relaxed and talked about how much she enjoyed the human world. This confirmed Kanan's suspicion that Ammy was only there for fun. Ammy teased her, saying she wanted to see an even bigger love rivalry next time. Kanan complained that Yuji was too bold for spending time with another girl. She admitted she also wanted to have lunch with him, but quickly took it back, saying she still had her pride as a demon. To relieve stress, she grabbed Shoro and pinched his cheeks. Then Ammy became more serious. She warned Kanan that she might be developing real feelings for Yuji, which could lead to heartbreak since her goal was to devour his soul. Kanan was confused at first, then suddenly remembered her original goal. Shocked, she tried to refocus but quickly convinced herself she could use love to her advantage. If Yuji fell deeply in love, he might give his soul willingly. Ammy suggested going on a date. Kanan became flustered and said she didn't understand what a date was. Ammy explained it was simply spending time together. She teased Kanan, which made her even more embarrassed. Finally, Kanan decided she would invite Yuji out. The next day, she called him to the disciplinary office. Nervous, she tried to act calm but couldn't say what she wanted. She kept making mistakes, saying strange things like duel instead of date. Yuji didn't question it and seemed excited anyway. In the end, Kanan lost her patience. She grabbed his shirt and directly asked him out, telling him to meet her at the station at 11. When she left the room, everything hit her at once. Kanan suddenly feels overwhelmed, her confidence fading into pure embarrassment over what she just did. But back in the room, Yuji is left standing there, completely stunned, still trying to process what just happened. Then, the scene shifts to their long-awaited date. Yuji can barely contain his excitement when he realizes their destination is the iconic Tokyo Skytree. As they arrive and head up to the observation deck, his energy is obvious, and Kanan can't help but giggle at how enthusiastic he is. However, behind that playful reaction, she's actually scheming. She quietly snickers to herself, thinking this is the perfect setup for her plan to make his heart race by scaring him, hoping he'll mistake that fear for love. So, while Yuji approaches her again and casually compliments her outfit, making her laugh, Kanan decides it's time to act. She walks over to the glass window and casually mentions how scary the height is, trying to lure him into looking down with her. But just as she's about to grab his hand, things don't go as planned. Yuji suddenly shifts away, pointing out another view in the opposite direction, clearly avoiding the situation. At first, Kanan is confused. Normally, he's the one eager to get close or hold her hand, but now, something feels off. As she studies his face more closely, she notices the slight tension. He actually looks nervous. That's when it clicks. Maybe he's genuinely afraid of heights. And instead of being thrown off, she realizes she can use this to her advantage. So, she starts teasing him, trying to push him into admitting his fear. Even when he resists, she keeps going, pulling on his arm and getting closer, trying to drag him toward the window. But in the middle of that struggle, something unexpected happens. His arm accidentally brushes against her chest. And in that instant, Kanan freezes. She suddenly remembers something very important, something she forgot. Yuji, already flustered, grows even more nervous. But his curiosity gets the better of him, and he hesitantly asks if she might have forgotten to wear something important. After a brief pause, Kanan admits it. She did forget an important piece of clothing. What she doesn't say, though, is that it happened because she was too nervous earlier. Then she asks if that's why he's been acting distant. Yuji quietly nods, and just like that, her composure completely crumbles. Her face turns bright red as embarrassment takes over. Still, trying to salvage her pride, she forces herself to act bold. When he asks if it was intentional, she said yes, despite clearly being flustered, that it was all part of her plan to make his heart race. Even with her face burning, she smiles and asks if it worked. Without hesitation, Yuji loudly admits that his heart is definitely racing. That answer catches her off guard, and she quickly asks if that means her plan succeeded. He happily praises her, completely sincere. Then, taking things even further, he shyly asks if he can brush her chest again. But that's too much for Kanan to handle. Completely overwhelmed, she drops to her knees in defeat, unable to keep up with him. Later on, they're back down on the ground, taking a break with some snacks. But Kanan is still too embarrassed to even eat. Meanwhile, Yuji gently encourages her, offering her some takoyaki he bought. He even offers to feed her himself. At first, she keeps her head down, trying to hide her face. But after a moment, she starts to think, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Slowly, she lifts her head. Yuji notices and asks if she's feeling shy, which she immediately denies, loudly. Then, hesitantly, she leans closer. It takes a second, but eventually she opens her mouth and eats the takoyaki from the stick. Afterward, she proudly declares that she managed to do it, even asking if she did okay. But instead of teasing her, Yuji just smiles warmly. When she questions his expression, he simply says he feels satisfied. Trying to regain control of the situation, Kanan decides to turn things around. She offers to feed him this time. As Yuji leans in, expecting to take a bite, she suddenly pulls the takoyaki back and eats it herself. Then she smirks, clearly pleased with her little trick. But instead of being annoyed, Yuji looks at her with surprising affection. He gently tells her that earlier, she seemed a bit down, so seeing her smile now makes him really happy. He even admits how much he loves her smile. And just like that, everything shifts. Kanan freezes, her heart starting to race for real this time. She quickly turns away, trying to hide her face, but inside, something is changing. For the first time, she begins to realize she might actually like him. Then, Yuji casually asks what they should do next, saying he's fine with anything, as long as it makes her happy. Hearing that, Kanan feels a pang of guilt. While he's been focused entirely on her happiness, she's been secretly plotting her own selfish goal this whole time. But soon, she picks up another takoyaki and offers it to him again, saying she wants to try one more time. That marks the end of today's anime recap. If you enjoyed the video and want more of it, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribe. Let's help us reach a current goal of 10K subscribers.